My baby's gone. Someone took my baby. My baby is gone. November 10th, 2009. Fayetteville, North Carolina. A 911 call came in at 5:32 a.m. A woman's voice, frantic, reporting her daughter missing. The dispatcher asked standard questions. How old? When did you last see her? What was she wearing? The woman on the phone, Shaniya Davis, provided answers. Her daughter, 5-year-old. Last seen in her bed around midnight. Gone when Antoinette checked on her at 5 a.m. The dispatcher's training kicked in. Time was critical in child abduction cases. The first few hours could mean the difference between recovery and tragedy. She dispatched officers immediately to the Sleepy Hollow trailer park on Sloane Street. Officers arrived within 7 minutes. Met Antoinette Davis outside her mobile home. She was 25 years old. 5 other children clustered around her. She seemed upset, crying, wringing her hands, playing the part of a distraught mother perfectly. The officers entered the trailer. It was cluttered, dirty. The smell hit them immediately. Unwashed bodies, garbage, something rotting, red flags everywhere. But their focus was finding her. They searched every room, every closet, under beds, in cabinets, anywhere a 5-year-old might hide or be hidden. Nothing. She wasn't in the trailer, wasn't in the immediate area. She was genuinely gone. Before we continue, share, subscribe, and turn on notification. Because this isn't just another true crime story. This is about the darkest betrayal imaginable. And if you have children, if you know children, you need to hear what happened to a 5-year-old. Because monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like mothers. The responding officer began interviewing Antoinette. Standard protocol. When did you last see Shaniya Davis? What was she wearing? Did you hear anything unusual? Antoinette's answers were consistent. She'd put Shaniya to bed around 11 p.m. Checked on her around midnight. Everything was fine. Woke up at 5 a.m. to get ready for the day. Shaniya's bed was empty. Could she have wandered off? The officer asked. No, she never does that. Someone took her. Someone came in and took my baby. Was the door locked? Antoinette hesitated. I'm not sure. I thought it was. The officer checked the door. No signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No damaged windows. If someone had taken Shaniya, they'd either had a key or the door had been unlocked. Both scenarios raised questions. Who has access to your home? Just me and the kids. And my boyfriend. And some friends who come by sometimes. Does Shaniya's father have a key? Antoinette's face hardened. No, he doesn't come around. Doesn't have rights. That was partially true. Shaniya's father, Bradley Lockhart, had been fighting for custody, had concerns about Shaniya living with Antoinette, but the courts had ruled in Antoinette's favor. Shaniya had been living with her mother for only 3 weeks. Before that, she'd been with her aunt, safe, healthy, thriving. Then Antoinette had demanded Shaniya back, claimed she'd turned her life around, was ready to be a mother. The aunt, reluctant but legally bound, had returned Shaniya 3 weeks ago, and now Shaniya was gone. The officer radioed for backup, for detectives, for the K-9 unit, for every resource available, because this wasn't adding up. A 5-year-old doesn't vanish from a locked trailer without someone knowing something. A detective arrived at 6:15 a.m. He'd worked child abduction cases before, knew the statistics, knew that most abducted children who are killed die within the first 3 hours, knew they were already pushing that window, knew every minute mattered. He pulled Antoinette aside, away from the children, away from the growing crowd of neighbors and officers, started asking harder questions. Tell me about yesterday, everything. Who came by? Who had contact with Shaniya? Antoinette's story was vague. Some friends had stopped by. She couldn't remember exactly who. People came and went all the time. She didn't always pay attention. What friends? Just people. From the neighborhood. I don't know all their names. The detective felt his instincts firing. Something was wrong here. Mothers of missing 5-year-olds don't give vague answers. They're specific, desperate. They provide every detail hoping something helps find their child. Antoinette, I need you to focus. Your daughter is missing. Every detail matters. Who was in this trailer yesterday? She thought for a moment. Mario might have stopped by. Mario McNeill. He's a friend. When? Yesterday afternoon. Maybe around 4. What did he want? Just visiting. We hung out for a bit. Did he interact with Shaniah? Antoinette shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. I wasn't paying attention. The detective wrote down the name. Mario McNeill. They'd need to talk to him. See if he'd seen anything. If he knew anything. Standard procedure. By 7 a.m., the trailer park was swarming with law enforcement. K-9 units were tracking Shania's scent. Volunteers were organizing search parties. Media were setting up cameras. The story was spreading. 5-year-old girl, missing from her bed. Possible abduction. Shania's photo was distributed. A beautiful child. Light brown skin. Dark curly hair. Bright eyes. The kind of face that makes people care. Makes them want to help. Within hours, her image was on every news station in North Carolina. Amber Alert issued. Everyone looking for the little girl who'd vanished in the night. Bradley Lockhart, Shania's father, saw the news at his home 2 hours away. He'd been fighting to get Shaniah back. Had concerns about Antoinette's ability to care for her. Had begged family court to reconsider custody. They'd denied him. Said Shaniah needed to be with her mother. That maternal rights took precedence. He'd last seen Shaniah 2 weeks ago. A supervised visit. She'd seemed different, withdrawn. Not the happy child who'd lived with his sister. He'd asked if everything was okay. Shaniah had nodded, but something in her eyes had worried him. Now she was gone, and Bradley felt rage and terror mixing in his chest. He'd known. He'd known that Antoinette wasn't capable, that Shaniah wasn't safe, and he'd been ignored, and now his daughter was missing. He drove to Fayetteville immediately, arrived at the trailer park by 9 a.m., demanded to talk to police, demanded answers, demanded to know how this had happened. Investigators interviewed him. Bradley was cooperative, answered every question, provided his whereabouts, gave permission to search his home, his car, his workplace. He had nothing to hide. He just wanted Shaniah found. I told them, Bradley said, voice breaking. I told the courts she wasn't safe with Antoinette, that her house was dangerous, that Shaniah needed to stay with my sister. But they didn't listen. They said mothers have rights, that Antoinette deserved a chance. And now look what happened. The detective took notes. Bradley's anger was justified. His fear was genuine. He wasn't a suspect. He was a father watching his worst nightmare unfold. Back at the trailer, forensic teams were processing the scene, looking for evidence, for clues, for anything that might explain how a 5-year-old vanished from her bed. They found Shania's room. It was sparse. A mattress on the floor. No sheets. A few toys scattered around. The window was closed, locked from the inside. The only exit was through the door, through the main living area where Antoinette claimed she'd been sleeping. How does someone carry a 5-year-old through a small trailer without waking anyone? Without making noise? Without being seen? The layout made it nearly impossible unless everyone was sleeping deeply, or unless everyone knew what was happening. Investigators started developing a theory, one they didn't want to believe, one that made their stomachs turn, but one that fit the evidence. What if Shaniah hadn't been taken? What if she'd been given? They looked at Antoinette, at her vague answers, her lack of specific details, her strange calmness underneath the performed distress. And they wondered. By noon, news helicopters were circling. Search and rescue teams were combing nearby woods. Volunteers were knocking on doors. Everyone looking for Shaniya Davis. A massive community response. Hundreds of people mobilized to find one little girl. But investigators weren't focused on the woods. They were focused on Antoinette, on her story, on the inconsistencies, on the feeling in their guts that she knew more than she was saying. They brought her in for another interview. More formal this time. At the station, with cameras rolling. They needed her on record. Needed to lock down her story before it could change. Walk me through last night again. Every detail. Antoinette repeated her story. Same timeline. Same vague details. Same performance of maternal distress. Tell me about Mario McNeill. He's just a friend. Comes around sometimes. How long have you known him? A few weeks. Maybe a month. How'd you meet? Around. The neighborhood. The investigator leaned forward. Antoinette, I need you to be straight with me. Is there any reason Mario would take Shaniah? No. Why would he? He barely knows her. You said he was at your house yesterday. What time did he leave? I don't know. Evening sometime. Before or after you put Shaniah to bed? I'm not sure. Maybe before. The investigator made note of the uncertainty, the vagueness, the way Antoinette couldn't commit to specifics. We're going to need to talk to Mario. Do you know where he is? No. He comes and goes. I don't keep track. Do you have his phone number? Yeah. She provided it. The investigator stepped out. Had officers track down Mario McNeill. They needed to talk to him. Needed to know what he'd seen. What he knew. Whether he was involved. What they didn't know yet was that Mario McNeill was already gone. Had left Fayetteville early that morning. Was running. Because he knew what he'd done. Knew they'd be looking for him. Knew his time was limited. And somewhere, Shaniya Davis was still missing. Still gone. Still in danger. The clock was ticking. Every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding her alive. By 2 p.m. on November 10th, Shaniya Davis had been missing for approximately 9 hours. The window for safe recovery was closing, and investigators had a terrible feeling they were already too late. If you're still watching, you're clearly interested in real cases told in full. Like, share, subscribe now, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. November 10th, 2009. 3 p.m. The lead detective sat in the station reviewing everything they had. Which wasn't much. A missing 5-year-old. A mother with a questionable story. A man named Mario McNeill who'd visited the day before and was now unreachable. Investigators ran Mario McNeill through the system. What came back made their blood run cold. Mario Antwanette McNeill. Age 29. Multiple arrests. Assault. Drug charges. And most disturbing, a previous charge involving a minor. Sexual contact with a child under 13. He'd pled down. Served minimal time. Was on the sex offender registry. And Antoinette Davis had let this man into her home. Around her children. Around Shaniah. They called Antoinette. Did you know Mario McNeill is a registered sex offender? Silence on the other end. Antoinette. I didn't know. He never said. You let him around your children without checking who he was? He seemed nice. I didn't think. The detective wanted to scream. Wanted to reach through the phone and shake this woman who'd put her daughter in danger. But he kept his voice professional. We need to find Mario. Now, if you hear from him, you call me immediately. Understand? Yes. He hung up. Issued a bolo for Mario McNeill. Be on the lookout. Approach with caution. Possible child abduction suspect. Every officer in the region got the alert. Every agency was notified. They needed to find this man before it was too late. If it wasn't already too late. At 4 p.m., investigators got a call from Bradley Lockhart. Shania's father had been making his own calls, talking to family, piecing together Shania's last few weeks. What he'd learned was disturbing. Shaniah wasn't eating, Bradley told them. My sister visited her at Antoinette's last week. She said Shaniah looked thin. Asked Antoinette about it. Antoinette said Shaniah was picky, that she'd eat when she was hungry. Investigators wrote this down. Potential neglect. Added to the growing list of concerns. There's more, Bradley continued. My sister said the house was filthy. Kids everywhere. Strange men coming and going. She was worried. Wanted to call CPS. But Antoinette promised she'd clean up. Do better. My sister gave her a chance. And now Shania's gone. CPS, Child Protective Services. Investigators made a note to pull their records, see if they'd had prior contact with Antoinette Davis. By 5 p.m., they had Mario McNeil's location, or his last known location, a motel room on Gillespie Street. He checked in that morning, around 6 a.m., just 30 minutes after Shaniah was reported missing. Officers descended on the location, knocked on the door. No answer. The manager provided a key. They entered with weapons drawn, cleared the room. Empty. Mario had checked in but wasn't there now. The room showed signs of recent occupation. The bed was unmade. Towels were used. But no Mario. No Shaniah. Nothing that immediately helped. Forensics processed the room anyway. Collected samples. Fingerprints. DNA. Hair fibers. Anything that might connect Mario to Shaniah. Anything that might prove she'd been there. They also pulled security footage from the motel. Investigators watched hours of tape, looking for anything, for Mario arriving, for anyone with him, for any sign of Shaniah. At 6:47 p.m., they saw it. The footage showed Mario McNeel entering the motel, alone, walking from the parking lot. But there was something in the way he moved, purposeful, quick, like he was trying not to be noticed. Investigators kept watching, looking for what they knew had to be there, looking for the moment that would break this case open. Later in the footage, Mario exited the motel, got in his car, a dark SUV, drove away. The cameras caught his license plate. They already had that. What they needed was evidence of Shaniah. Investigators reviewed the footage again, slower this time, looking for anything they'd missed. That's when they saw it. When Mario had arrived at 6 a.m., there'd been movement in his vehicle. In the back seat, something small, child-sized. The image quality wasn't good enough to confirm, but investigators knew. Shaniah had been in that car, had been brought to this motel, had been here, which meant she might still be alive, might still be somewhere in the area. They needed to find Mario's car, needed to find it now. At 8 p.m., Antoinette Davis called the station. She'd heard from Mario. He'd sent her a text message. What did it say? An investigator demanded. Just checking in, asking if everything was okay. When did you get this? A few minutes ago. Did you respond? No. You said to call you. Give me your phone. Now. Investigators got Antoinette's phone records subpoenaed. Started tracing Mario's number. Working with the phone company. Triangulating his location. They were close. They had to be close. By 9 p.m., the media was in full frenzy. Shania's face was everywhere. News anchors were calling it a race against time. Community members were organizing candlelight vigils. Everyone praying for Shania's safe return. But investigators knew the statistics. Knew that children abducted by non-family members had a survival window measured in hours. Shaniah had been gone for 15 hours. The chances of finding her alive were dropping by the minute. At 10 p.m., they got a break. A gas station attendant called. Said a man matching Mario's description had stopped for gas around 8 p.m., about 30 miles south of Fayetteville. Paid cash. Drove off heading south on Highway 87. Police dispatched units. Highway Patrol. Sheriff's Department. Everyone available. They set up checkpoints. Started stopping vehicles. Looking for Mario's dark SUV. At 11 p.m., they found the car. Abandoned on the side of Highway 87. Empty. No Mario. No Shaniah. Just an abandoned vehicle with evidence inside that would later confirm their worst fears. Forensic teams processed the SUV. Found traces. Biological evidence. Things that suggested Shaniah had been in this car. Things that suggested she'd been hurt. Things that made hardened investigators step away and compose themselves before continuing. But no Shaniah. No body. No definitive answers. At midnight, Antoinette Davis was brought back to the station. Investigators had questions. Lots of questions. And her vague answers were no longer acceptable. Tell me the truth about Mario McNeel. I told you. He's a friend. A friend. A registered sex offender. A man you let into your home with your children. A man who visited the day before Shaniah disappeared. A man who's now running. That kind of friend. Antoinette looked at her hands. Said nothing. Antoinette, we found his car. We found evidence. We know Shaniah was with him. We know he took her from your house. What I don't know is whether you helped him. Whether you knew. Whether you're involved. I didn't help him take her. The investigator caught the wording. Didn't help him take her. But maybe helped him access her? Maybe knew what he wanted? Maybe facilitated something? What did you do, Antoinette? Nothing. I didn't do anything. Your daughter is missing. A convicted sex offender had access to her. His car shows evidence of her presence. Evidence that she was hurt. And you're telling me you didn't do anything? You didn't know anything? Antoinette started crying. Real tears this time. Not performed. Genuine distress. But was it for Shaniah? Or for herself? I need a lawyer, she said. And that was it. The conversation ended. Antoinette invoked her right to counsel. Investigators couldn't question her further. Not without her lawyer present. But they didn't need her confession. Not yet, because evidence was piling up. Phone records showing communication between Antoinette and Mario in the days before Shaniah's disappearance. Financial records that would later reveal transactions. Money changing hands. Payment for something. Payment for a child. At 1 a.m., still on November 10th, investigators stood outside the station. Looked at Shaniah's photo taped to the incident board. 5 years old. Missing for 19 hours. Evidence suggesting she'd been hurt. A mother who wasn't talking. A suspect who'd fled. And somewhere, Shaniya Davis was still out there. Still missing. Still waiting to be found. One investigator made a promise to that photo. To that little girl. He would find her. He would bring her home. He would get justice. Whatever it took. However long it took. But first, they had to find Mario McNeill. Had to make him talk. Had to learn what he'd done with Shaniah. Where she was. Whether she was still alive. The manhunt intensified. Every available resource deployed. Federal agencies called in. FBI joining the search. Because this wasn't just a missing child anymore. This was child trafficking. Kidnapping. Sexual assault of a minor. Federal crimes with federal resources. And as dawn broke on November 10th, 2009, just hours after Shaniah was first reported missing, the search entered its most critical phase. A phase that would bring answers. But not the answers anyone wanted. Not the happy ending everyone prayed for. Because sometimes, prayers aren't enough. Sometimes evil wins. Sometimes a 5-year-old child pays the price for adult depravity. And Shaniya Davis had already paid that price. The world just didn't know it yet. November 10th, 2009, 7 a.m. The lead investigators had been working through the night, running on coffee and determination. The team was exhausted, but nobody was stopping. Not when a 5-year-old was still missing. The FBI had set up a command center, coordinating the search, analyzing evidence, building a profile of Mario McNeill, understanding his patterns, his history, his likely behavior. Federal agents led the effort. They'd worked child exploitation cases for years, seen the worst humanity had to offer, but every case still affected them. Every missing child drove them to work harder. We need to find McNeill, one agent told the team. He's the key. Find him, we find out what happened to Shaniah. Local investigators agreed. But Mario had vanished. The abandoned SUV was their last concrete lead. After that, nothing. No sightings. No phone pings. No credit card usage. He'd gone completely off-grid. Unless he hadn't. At 8 a.m., investigators got a call from a local business. The Comfort Suites Hotel on Owen Drive. They'd seen the news. Recognized Mario's photo. He'd been there. Earlier that morning. Investigators felt adrenaline spike. When? Check-in was around 6 a.m. this morning. He was supposed to check out tomorrow, but he left hours ago. Around 11 a.m. Did he have anyone with him? I didn't see anyone. But I wasn't watching the whole time. Do you have security cameras? Yes. Don't let anyone touch that footage. We're coming now. Investigators and federal agents arrived at the Comfort Suites within 20 minutes. The manager led them to the security office, pulled up footage from November 10th, started it at 5 a.m., before Mario's registered check-in time. At 5:47 a.m., a dark SUV pulled into the parking lot. Mario's vehicle. They watched as Mario got out, walked to the passenger side, opened the rear door. An FBI agent leaned forward. What is he doing? They watched. Mario reached into the back seat. And then he lifted something. Someone. A small figure. Wrapped in a blanket. An investigator felt his heart stop. That's her. That's Shaniah. The footage showed Mario carrying the blanket-wrapped child. Her face wasn't visible, but the size was right. The age was right. It was Shaniya Davis, being carried into a hotel by a man who'd abducted her. But then the footage showed something that made the entire room go silent. As Mario walked toward the hotel entrance, the blanket shifted, and Shania's face became visible for just 3 seconds, just long enough for the camera to capture her expression. She was awake, eyes open, looking around, but not fighting, not screaming, just compliant, like she'd been taught not to resist, like she knew fighting was pointless. An FBI agent had tears streaming down her face. She's alive. At 5:47 a.m. on November 10th, Shaniya Davis was alive. Investigators noted the timestamp. Alive at 5:47 a.m., less than an hour after her mother reported her missing, which meant Antoinette had waited, had known Shaniah was taken, had delayed reporting it. Why? They continued watching. Mario entered the hotel lobby, walked past the unmanned front desk, carried Shaniah down a hallway. Out of camera view, investigators contacted the hotel manager. Which room did Mario McNeill check into? Room 156. We need that room sealed. Now, it's a crime scene. The room was processed immediately. Forensic teams went over every inch, collected DNA samples, fingerprints, fiber evidence, anything that could prove Shaniah had been there, anything that could tell them what had happened in that room. What they found was damning. Shaniah's DNA, on the bed, on towels, biological evidence that suggested sexual assault, evidence that a 5-year-old child had been raped in this hotel room while the world searched for her. One investigator had to step outside. The rage and grief were too much. He'd been a detective for 20 years, had seen terrible things, but nothing prepared you for evidence of a child being sexually abused. Nothing made that easier to process. An FBI agent found him outside. We have the timeline now. She was taken from Antoinette's house sometime late on November 9th or early November 10th. Brought to this hotel by 5:47 a.m. Assaulted. Then Mario left with her again. Where did he take her? The investigator asked. The abandoned SUV was found 30 miles south. When did he leave this hotel? They pulled more security footage. At 11:23 a.m. on November 10th, Mario was seen carrying the blanket-wrapped bundle back to his SUV, getting in, driving away. So Shaniah had been at the Comfort Suites from 5:47 a.m. to 11:23 a.m., 5.5 hours, while police searched, while media broadcasted her photo, while her father begged for her return. She'd been right there, in that hotel room, being hurt. The timeline was becoming clear, but the most important question remained unanswered. Where was Shaniah now? At 10 a.m., the FBI released the surveillance footage to media. Not all of it, not the graphic evidence, but the image of Mario carrying Shaniah into the hotel. The proof that she'd been alive, that she'd been abducted, that Mario McNeill was absolutely their suspect. The image went viral. National news picked it up. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, everyone showing the same haunting footage. A grown man carrying a small child wrapped in a blanket. A child who should have been safe in her bed. A child who'd been sold by her own mother. Because by now, investigators had pieced together the truth about Antoinette Davis. Phone records showed contact with Mario in the days before. Text messages that were coded but clear in their meaning. References to money, to deals, to arrangements. Financial records showed Mario had withdrawn $200 in cash 2 days before Shaniah disappeared. That cash was never accounted for, never found, likely paid to Antoinette for access to her daughter. Antoinette Davis hadn't reported Shaniah missing because someone abducted her. She'd reported her missing because the transaction had gone wrong. Because Mario wasn't supposed to take Shaniah away. He was supposed to hurt her and return her. That was the arrangement. But Mario had decided to keep her, to take her, to do whatever he wanted without time limits or witnesses. And Antoinette, realizing she'd lost control of the situation, had called police, not to save Shaniah, but to save herself, to establish that she'd reported the disappearance, to create cover. The evidence of Antoinette's involvement was mounting. Federal prosecutors prepared arrest warrants. Human trafficking, prostitution of a minor, felony child abuse, conspiracy, every charge they could make stick. But first they needed to find Shaniah, needed to know if she was still alive, needed to locate her before it was truly too late. At 11 a.m., tips started pouring in from the released surveillance footage. People who'd seen Mario, people who'd seen the SUV, people who remembered something that might help. One tip stood out. A truck driver. He'd been heading south on Highway 87 on November 10th around noon. Had seen a dark SUV pulled over on the side of the road. Man standing near the tree line. Seemed agitated. Nervous. The trucker had thought about stopping but decided against it. Kept driving. The location he described matched where Mario's SUV had been found, which meant Mario had stopped there, had left his vehicle there, had gone into the woods for some reason. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. K-9 units. Volunteers. They combed the area around where the SUV was found, looking for any sign, any trace, any evidence of what had happened. At 2 p.m., a search dog alerted, led handlers off the main road, down a dirt path, into dense woods, about a quarter mile from where the SUV had been abandoned. And there, in a thicket of brush and undergrowth, they found her. Shaniya Davis, 5 years old, wrapped in the same blanket seen in the surveillance footage. No longer alive, no longer suffering, but gone. Taken from the world by monsters who saw her as a commodity, as an object, as something to be used and discarded. The medical examiner would later determine she'd been dead since approximately midday on November 10th. Meaning she'd survived less than 24 hours after being taken from her mother's house. Less than 1 day between being betrayed by the person who should have protected her and dying alone in the woods. An investigator stood over Shania's small body and wept. Hardened detective, 20 years on the force, wept like a child, because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not to 5-year-olds. Not to innocent children who trusted the adults in their lives. Not to Shaniya Davis who'd smiled in her school photos and played with toys and deserved a childhood. The scene was processed carefully, reverently, every piece of evidence collected, every detail documented, because this wasn't just a crime scene. It was Shania's final resting place, the last location on Earth where she'd existed. And she deserved dignity, deserved respect, deserved better than what had been done to her. News spread quickly. Shaniya Davis found deceased. The Amber Alert was canceled. The search called off. The hope that had sustained so many for hours evaporated, replaced by grief, rage, questions about how this could happen. Bradley Lockhart was notified. His worst fear confirmed. His daughter dead. Killed by a monster her mother had invited into their lives. He collapsed, literally fell to his knees. Security footage from outside the police station showed him being held up by family members, showed him screaming, showed a father's world ending in real time. At 4 p.m., the manhunt for Mario McNeel intensified. He was no longer just a kidnapping suspect. He was a murderer, a child killer, one of the most wanted men in North Carolina. His photo was everywhere. His name was everywhere, and the public's rage made it clear. If someone found him before police did, he might not survive to face trial. But Mario McNeill was already planning his next move, already trying to figure out how to escape justice, already believing he could get away with what he'd done. He was wrong. As we go on, like, share, subscribe now, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. November 11th, 2009, 6 p.m. Mario Antwanette McNeill was spotted at a convenience store in Sanford, North Carolina, about 40 miles from where Shania's body had been found. A clerk recognized him from the news, called 911. Police swarmed the location, surrounded the building, weapons drawn, ready for anything, because Mario was desperate, knew he was caught, knew what he'd done. Desperate men do unpredictable things. Mario McNeill, this is the police. Come out with your hands up. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened. Mario stepped out, hands raised. No fight, no resistance, just surrender. Like he'd known this moment was inevitable. Like he'd been waiting for it. Officers tackled him, handcuffed him, read him his rights, and Mario said nothing, just stared ahead with empty eyes. The eyes of someone who'd crossed a line so far into darkness that there was no coming back. He was transported to Fayetteville Police Department, booked on charges of first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree rape of a child, the most serious charges North Carolina had, charges that carried the death penalty. Investigators watched through one-way glass as Mario was processed. This was the man who'd killed Shaniya Davis, who'd raped a 5-year-old, who'd thrown her away like garbage when he was done. And they wanted nothing more than to go into that room and make Mario suffer. But they didn't, because the system had to work, had to be followed. Justice had to be served properly, legally, so that Mario couldn't escape on a technicality, so that Shania's death meant something, so that her killer faced consequences. An FBI agent spoke to the lead investigator. "We need his confession. He's not talking." Lawyered up immediately. "Then we use evidence. We have enough. DNA from the hotel, the surveillance footage, witnesses who saw him with his vehicle, the location where he abandoned the SUV near her body. We don't need his confession. I want it anyway. I want him to admit what he did. I want him to say her name. I want him to acknowledge that he took a child's life." The agent understood. It wasn't about the case. The case was solid. It was about humanity, about needing Mario to show some remorse, some recognition of the horror he'd caused. But Mario McNeill showed nothing, said nothing, sat in interrogation with his court-appointed lawyer and remained silent. His rights, his choice, and legally they couldn't force him to talk. While Mario sat in custody, attention turned to Antoinette Davis. November 12, 2009, 8 a.m. Antoinette was arrested at her trailer, charged with human trafficking, felony child abuse, filing a false police report, obstruction of justice. The charges would later expand. But for now, these were enough. She protested, claimed innocence, said she was a victim too, that Mario had tricked her, that she hadn't known what he planned to do, that she was a mother grieving her lost child. Nobody believed her. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages between Antoinette and Mario discussing arrangements, financial records showing money changed hands, testimony from Antoinette's other children that strange men often came to the house, that Shaniah had been treated differently from the other kids, that Antoinette had allowed things to happen that a mother should never allow. Child Protective Services records were unsealed. They painted a damning picture. Antoinette Davis had a history, multiple reports of neglect, investigations into her home, children removed temporarily then returned, red flags everywhere that had been ignored or downplayed or filed away. Shaniah herself had been flagged. When she was living with her aunt, before Antoinette demanded her back, she'd been healthy, happy, thriving. Then 3 weeks with Antoinette, and she was dead. The system had failed Shaniah multiple times, multiple agencies, Multiple people who should have protected her, who should have seen what was coming, who should have kept her safe. But the system wasn't in the interrogation room. Antoinette was, and she would answer for her role in her daughter's death. An investigator led the interview. Antoinette's lawyer sat beside her, a public defender who knew his client was facing life in prison, who knew the evidence was damning, who could only hope for a plea deal that might spare Antoinette from death row. "Tell me about your relationship with Mario McNeill," the investigator began. "I don't have to answer that." "You don't, but you're going to be asked in court, under oath, with a jury watching. You can practice now, or you can go in cold." Antoinette looked at her lawyer. He nodded. "Might as well. I met him a few weeks ago, through friends. He seemed nice. Nice enough to let around your children even though he was a registered sex offender?" "I didn't know that." "You didn't check? Didn't ask? Just let a stranger into your home with 5 kids. People are innocent until proven guilty." "I gave him the benefit of the doubt." The investigator slid photos across the table. Text messages between Antoinette and Mario. "What's this about?" Antoinette looked at the messages. Her face went pale. Those are out of context." "Really? Because it looks like you and Mario discussing money, discussing arrangements, discussing Shaniah specifically." "No, that's not what those mean." "Then what do they mean?" Silence. The investigator leaned forward. "Antoinette, we know what you did. We know you sold access to your daughter. We know Mario paid you. We know you arranged for him to be alone with Shaniah. We know you waited to report her missing because you thought he'd bring her back. We know everything." Tears streamed down Antoinette's face. "I didn't think he'd hurt her. I didn't think he'd take her. He was just supposed to." She stopped, realized what she was about to say, realized she was about to confess. Her lawyer jumped in. "We're done here. My client has nothing more to say." But she'd said enough. He was just supposed to. Supposed to what? Rape her and return her? Use her and give her back? What was the plan, Antoinette? What did you think was going to happen when you sold your 5-year-old daughter to a pedophile? The interview ended, but the evidence kept building. By November 13th, additional charges were filed against Antoinette. First-degree murder. Under North Carolina law, participating in a felony that results in death made you culpable for that death. Antoinette had trafficked her daughter. That trafficking resulted in Shaniah's murder. Therefore, Antoinette was charged with murder. Prosecutors were pushing for the death penalty. For both Antoinette and Mario, this wasn't just murder. This was the most depraved, heinous, evil kind of murder. A mother selling her child. A man raping and killing a 5-year-old. They both deserved the ultimate punishment. Public outrage was unprecedented. Protests outside the jail where Antoinette was held. Death threats. Guards had to keep her in protective custody because even other inmates wanted her dead. Child killers were hated. But mothers who killed their own children, who sold them, who traded them for cash, they were beyond hate, beyond contempt, beyond any category of human decency. Shaniah's funeral was held November 14th, 2009. Over 1,000 people attended. Many who'd never met her. People who'd just followed her story. Who'd prayed for her safe return. Who grieved for a child they didn't know because her story represented every parent's worst nightmare. Bradley Lockhart stood at the funeral, held photos of Shaniah, spoke about his daughter, about her laugh, her smile, her love of dolls and cartoons, about the little girl she'd been before Antoinette destroyed her. "I fought for her," Bradley said, voice breaking. "I told them she wasn't safe. I begged them to let her stay with my sister, but they said mothers have rights, that Antoinette deserved a chance. They gave her a chance, and she used that chance to kill our daughter." The media coverage was relentless. National attention, international attention. Shaniah's story spread across the world. The surveillance footage of Mario carrying her into that hotel. The manhunt, the discovery of her body, the arrests, the charges. Every detail picked apart, every angle examined. And at the center of it all was a question nobody could answer. How do we prevent this from happening again? How do we identify mothers like Antoinette before they harm their children? How do we keep registered sex offenders away from vulnerable kids? How do we fix a system that failed Shaniya Davis so completely? The answer was complicated, involved more funding, better training, more oversight, mandatory checks, background screenings, all things that cost money, required political will, demanded societal commitment. And after the news cycle moved on, would anyone still care enough to make those changes? Or would Shaniah just be another dead child whose story briefly captured attention before being forgotten? That depended on people remembering, on people demanding better, on people refusing to let Shania's death be in vain. But first, justice had to be served. Mario and Antoinette had to face trial, had to be held accountable, had to spend the rest of their lives paying for what they'd done. And the legal system was preparing for exactly that. The legal proceedings against Mario McNeill and Antoinette Davis would take years. Motions, appeals, delays, the machinery of justice grinding slowly but inevitably toward judgment. Mario's trial came first, September 2013, nearly 4 years after Shania's death. 4 years of Bradley Lockhart waiting. 4 years of evidence being compiled. 4 years of Mario sitting in jail knowing what was coming. The trial was held in Cumberland County Superior Court. The courtroom was packed. Media, victims' advocates, citizens who needed to see justice. And in the front row, Bradley Lockhart, there every day, bearing witness for his daughter. The prosecutor stood before the jury for opening statements. He'd prosecuted hundreds of cases, but this one was personal. This one mattered in ways that transcended legal strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, on November 10, 2009, Mario McNeill kidnapped, raped, and murdered 5-year-old Shaniya Davis. The evidence will show beyond any doubt that he took this child from her home, that he assaulted her in a hotel room, that he killed her and dumped her body in the woods like garbage. And I'm going to ask you, after hearing all the evidence, to hold him accountable, to give Shaniya the justice she deserves. The defense had an impossible task. Mario's attorney, a public defender, couldn't deny what happened. The evidence was overwhelming. All he could do was try to spare Mario from death row, try to argue for life in prison instead of execution. This case is tragic, the defender said in his opening. What happened to Shaniya Davis is horrific. But we're here to determine appropriate punishment, not to act on rage or emotion. We're here to ensure justice, which includes considering all factors, including my client's mental state, his capacity, his history. It was a weak argument. Everyone in that courtroom knew it, but it was all the defense had. The prosecution's case was methodical. Evidence presented piece by piece, building an unshakable foundation. The surveillance footage was shown. The jury watched Mario carry Shaniya into the comfort suites, watched her small face visible for those 3 seconds, watched the timestamp, 5:47 a.m., watched proof that Shaniya had been alive, in Mario's possession, while her mother delayed reporting her missing. Several jury members cried. One woman covered her mouth. Another man clenched his fists so tight his knuckles went white. Hotel staff testified about checking Mario in, about room 156, about not seeing the child he'd brought with him because he'd concealed her in a blanket. Forensic experts testified about DNA evidence found in the hotel room, Shaniya's DNA, biological evidence of sexual assault, evidence that a 5-year-old had been raped in that room. The medical examiner testified about Shaniya's autopsy, about the injuries she'd sustained, about the cause of death, asphyxiation. Mario had strangled her, choked the life out of a 5-year-old child. The courtroom was silent except for testimony and occasional sobs from spectators. The evidence was so damning, so horrific, that there was nothing to say. Just watch, listen, bear witness to the worst of humanity. The defense called expert witnesses, psychologists who'd evaluated Mario, who testified about his IQ, his mental health history, his traumatic childhood. all the standard mitigation arguments. But the prosecution destroyed these on cross-examination. Yes, Mario had a difficult upbringing. Lots of people do. They don't rape and murder 5-year-olds. Yes, Mario had below-average intelligence. He was still capable of planning, of understanding consequences, of knowing right from wrong. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, arguments. 3 weeks of Bradley Lockhart sitting in that courtroom watching his daughter's killer face justice. On October 11, 2013, the jury deliberated. They were out for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, first-degree rape of a child, first-degree kidnapping. Mario showed no reaction, just sat there, empty, disconnected, like he'd known this was inevitable. Sentencing came a week later. The same jury had to decide life in prison or death penalty. The prosecution argued for death, presented aggravating factors: the age of the victim, the brutality of the crime, the sexual assault, the premeditation, the complete absence of remorse. Bradley Lockhart testified, gave a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. Shaniah was my daughter, my baby girl. She loved dolls, loved singing, loved life. And Mario McNeill took all of that away. He didn't just kill her. He tortured her, violated her, treated her like she wasn't even human. And now I have to live every day knowing what happened to her. Knowing her last hours were filled with pain and terror. Knowing she died alone and afraid. Bradley's voice broke. I'm asking you to give him death, not out of revenge, but because some crimes are so evil, so monstrous, that the person who committed them doesn't deserve to exist. Mario McNeill is that person. He doesn't deserve to live. He doesn't deserve mercy. He deserves exactly what he gave my daughter. Nothing. The defense argued for life, claimed death penalty was excessive, that Mario could serve life in prison, could die there naturally, that execution was unnecessary. The jury disagreed. On October 18, 2013, they recommended death. The judge concurred. Mario Antwanette McNeel was sentenced to death. He would be transferred to Central Prison in Raleigh, would sit on death row, would eventually be executed for what he'd done to Shaniya Davis. Mario was led away. No last words, no apology, no acknowledgement of his crime, just silence. The same silence he'd maintained throughout the trial. The same refusal to accept responsibility. The same absence of humanity. With Mario's trial concluded, attention turned to Antoinette Davis. Her trial was scheduled for 2014, but Antoinette's legal team had been working on a different strategy. They knew the evidence against her, knew she couldn't win at trial, knew a jury would convict her just like they'd convicted Mario. So they negotiated, offered a plea deal. Antoinette would plead guilty to certain charges in exchange for others being dropped, would accept responsibility in exchange for avoiding death row. Prosecutors considered it, weighed the certainty of a plea versus the risk of trial, decided that ensuring Antoinette faced consequences was more important than risking a lengthy appeals process. The plea deal was accepted. As we go on, like, share, subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. November 19, 2013. Almost exactly 4 years after Shania's death, Antoinette Davis stood before a judge, pled guilty to second-degree murder, human trafficking, sexual servitude, prostitution of a minor. In exchange, prosecutors dropped the first-degree murder charge, dropped the death penalty. Antoinette would serve life in prison. No possibility of parole. She would die behind bars, but she wouldn't be executed. Bradley Lockhart opposed the deal, wanted Antoinette to face death just like Mario, but prosecutors explained that the evidence against her, while strong, wasn't quite as airtight. There was a chance, however small, that a jury might not convict on first-degree murder, might not recommend death. The plea ensured Antoinette would never be free, would never hurt another child, would spend every remaining day of her life paying for what she'd done. At her sentencing, Antoinette was given a chance to speak, to address the court, to say something to Bradley, to acknowledge her role in Shania's death. She stood, faced the court, and spoke words that rang hollow to everyone present. "I'm sorry for what happened to Shaniah. I loved my daughter. I never meant for any of this to happen. I made mistakes, bad decisions, but I never wanted her to die. I'm not a monster. I'm just a person who made terrible choices, and I have to live with that." Bradley Lockhart stood up, yelling. Security had to restrain him. "You sold her. You traded your daughter for money. You're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught." The judge banged his gavel, restored order, then addressed Antoinette directly. "Ms. Davis, you may not see yourself as a monster, but your actions were monstrous. You took a child who trusted you, who loved you, who called you mommy, and you sold her, traded her to a predator for cash. Your daughter suffered because of your choices, died because of your choices, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison because of your choices." He handed down the sentence. Life without parole on the murder charge. Consecutive sentences on the other charges. Antoinette Davis would never see freedom again. She was led away to the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women, where she would spend decades growing old behind bars, where other inmates would make her life hell because even criminals have standards. Even people who've committed crimes despise those who hurt children. With both defendants sentenced, the legal chapter of Shania's story closed. Mario on death row, Antoinette in prison for life. Justice served to the fullest extent the law allowed. But justice didn't bring Shaniah back, didn't undo what had been done to her, didn't erase the pain, didn't answer the fundamental question. Why? Why does a mother sell her child? Why does a man rape and murder a 5-year-old? Why does evil exist in such pure, concentrated form? Those questions didn't have answers, or the answers were too dark to accept. That some people lack empathy, lack conscience, lack basic humanity, that monsters exist, that they often look normal, that they hide among us, and the only defense is vigilance, awareness, protection of the vulnerable, support for systems designed to identify and intervene before tragedies occur. But those systems had failed Shaniah, multiple times, multiple ways, and that failure needed to be examined, understood, fixed, because Shaniya Davis deserved better. Every child deserves better, and the only way to honor her memory was to ensure her death led to meaningful change. In the aftermath of Shania's death, North Carolina launched a comprehensive review of its child welfare system. What they found was a system stretched beyond breaking, underfunded, understaffed, overwhelmed. Child Protective Services had been involved with Antoinette Davis multiple times. Reports dating back years. Investigations into her home, her parenting, her lifestyle. Red flags everywhere. But each investigation had been closed, deemed unfounded or unsubstantiated. Children remained in Antoinette's care because the threshold for removal was high, because caseworkers made judgment calls based on limited information and impossible caseloads. Shaniah specifically had been flagged. When she lived with her aunt, she was healthy, thriving. Then Antoinette had demanded her back, claimed she'd changed, was ready to be a mother. Family court had ruled in her favor. Maternal rights, reunification, standard procedure. The aunt had protested, said Shaniah was better off staying with her, said Antoinette wasn't stable. But the court favored biological parents, gave Antoinette another chance, ordered Shaniah returned. 3 weeks later, Shaniah was dead. The caseworker who'd supervised that transition spoke publicly about her guilt, about how she'd followed protocol, done everything she was trained to do, but still felt responsible. "I knew Antoinette's history," she said in an interview. "I knew there were concerns, but I had 85 other cases. I couldn't monitor everyone constantly. I had to trust that the court's decision was right, that Antoinette would do better this time." She was crying. This woman who'd dedicated her career to protecting children, who'd seen the worst and kept trying to help. who now had to live with the knowledge that a child on her caseload had been murdered. The system isn't designed for success, she continued. We're expected to manage impossible workloads with inadequate resources, to make life or death decisions with incomplete information, to prevent tragedies while being blamed when they inevitably happen. She was right. North Carolina's CPS was systematically understaffed. Caseworkers averaged 80 to 100 cases each. National best practices recommended 12 to 15. The discrepancy was staggering. With those caseloads, thorough investigation was impossible. Caseworkers did triage, focused on the most urgent cases, made quick assessments, filed reports, moved on, because there was always another family, another crisis, another child waiting. Shania's case fell through the cracks, not because anyone was malicious, but because the system was broken, had been broken for years, and nobody with the power to fix it had made it a priority. After Shania's death, politicians promised reforms. More funding, lower caseloads, better training, mandatory background checks for anyone living in homes where children were placed. Some reforms were implemented. North Carolina increased CPS funding by 20%, hired more caseworkers, created new protocols for high-risk cases, implemented Shania's law requiring background checks on all adults in homes with foster or reunified children. But was it enough? The increased funding still left North Carolina below national averages. The new hires reduced caseloads but not to recommended levels. The background check law was good but only applied to specific situations. Fundamentally, the problem remained. Child protection was underfunded, undervalued, treated as an expense rather than an investment, and children continued to suffer because of it. The registered sex offender aspect also raised questions. Mario McNeill was on the registry. His crimes were public record. Anyone could look him up. But Antwanette either hadn't checked or hadn't cared. Should there be mandatory checks? Should parents be required to run background checks on anyone who has access to their children? How would that be enforced? Who would pay for it? These questions had no easy answers. Mandatory checks would be expensive, intrusive, difficult to enforce. But without them, predators had easy access to vulnerable children. North Carolina implemented a program encouraging parents to use the sex offender registry, public awareness campaigns, free background check resources, trying to empower parents to protect their own children. But empowerment required knowledge, required parents who cared. And in cases like Antoinette's, where the parent was the problem, no amount of empowerment mattered. The court system also came under scrutiny. Why had Shaniah been returned to Antoinette? What factors had the judge considered? What weight had been given to the aunt's concerns? Family court records were sealed. Privacy laws protected the proceedings. But advocacy groups pushed for transparency, argued that when children died, the public deserved to know what decisions had been made and why. North Carolina partially complied, created a child fatality review board, required examination of all cases where children in the system died, published findings without identifying information, trying to balance privacy with accountability. The reviews showed patterns. Many children who died had been involved with CPS. Many had been returned to parents against recommendations. Many had fallen through procedural cracks. The system was failing children, systematically, predictably, and Shaniah was just one visible example among thousands of invisible ones. Advocacy groups used Shaniah's case to push for broader changes. More funding for CPS nationwide, lower caseloads, better training, mandatory reporting by more professionals, stronger penalties for child abuse. Some changes happened. The federal government increased funding for child protection. States implemented new protocols. Training programs improved. Awareness grew. But change was slow, bureaucratic, insufficient, because ultimately child protection competes with other priorities. Education, infrastructure, healthcare, defense, and children don't vote, don't lobby, don't make campaign contributions. So their protection depends on adults prioritizing them. And adults collectively have failed to do so adequately. Shania's aunt spoke publicly about her guilt, about how she'd known Shaniah wasn't safe, had tried to keep her, but had been legally required to return her to Antoinette. I begged them not to make me give her back, she said. I told them Antoinette wasn't ready, that Shaniah was thriving with me, but they said biological parents have rights, that I had to comply, so I gave Shaniah back. And 3 weeks later, she was dead. She was crying. This woman who'd loved Shaniah, who'd provided her with stability and care, who'd been forced to hand her over to someone she knew was dangerous. The system values parents' rights over children's safety, she continued, and children pay the price. Shaniah paid with her life, and I have to live knowing I couldn't protect her, that I was forced to participate in her death. Bradley Lockhart echoed these concerns. He'd fought for custody, had been denied, had watched helplessly as Shaniah was placed with Antoinette, had known it would end badly, had been unable to stop it. The courts didn't care what was best for Shaniah, he said. They cared about procedure, about parental rights, about reunification statistics. Shaniah was a number in their system, and when she died, they moved on to the next number. He'd become an advocate, speaking at legislative hearings, pushing for reforms, using Shania's story to demand better protection for children. Some listened, some laws changed, some children were saved because of Shania's death, because her story became a rallying cry for reform. But not all children, not nearly all, because the fundamental problems, underfunding, understaffing, systemic dysfunction, remained, and as long as those problems remained, children would continue dying, continue slipping through cracks, continue being failed by the system meant to protect them. Shania's death should have been a wake-up call, should have sparked massive reform, should have led to comprehensive change in how America protects its most vulnerable citizens. Instead, it became another tragedy, another story, another set of headlines that briefly captured attention before fading into the background noise of ongoing dysfunction. Some people remember Shaniah. Advocates use her name. Activists reference her case. Politicians occasionally invoke her story when pushing child protection bills. But most people have forgotten, moved on, stopped caring. And that's the real tragedy. Not just that Shaniah died, but that her death changed so little. That the system that failed her continues failing other children. That lessons learned were superficial. That reforms implemented were inadequate. Shaniya Davis deserved better. Deserved to be remembered. Deserved to have her death mean something. Deserved to inspire change that actually protected children. Whether that happens depends on people. On whether society decides that protecting children matters more than budget constraints. More than bureaucratic convenience, more than adult rights and procedural precedent. Shaniah can't advocate for herself, can't speak to legislators, can't demand change, but her story can. If people listen, if people care, if people refuse to let another child die the way she died. That's the challenge. That's the responsibility. That's what honoring Shania's memory actually means. Not just mourning her death, but preventing the next one. Mario McNeill sits on death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's been there for over a decade, waiting, peeling, existing in the limbo between conviction and execution. Death penalty cases move slowly in North Carolina. Automatic appeals, procedural reviews, years, sometimes decades between sentencing and execution. The state has executed only one person since 2006. The death penalty exists but is rarely carried out. Mario knows this, knows he might die of old age before the state executes him, knows he has years, maybe decades, left, and he uses that time to maintain his innocence, to claim he didn't kill Shaniah, that he's been wrongly convicted. It's a lie. Everyone knows it's a lie. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. But Mario maintains the fiction, files appeals, claims ineffective counsel, claims procedural errors. claims anything that might delay or prevent his execution. The latest appeal was denied in 2022. The North Carolina Supreme Court affirmed his conviction and death sentence, found no merit in his claims, no reason to overturn the jury's verdict. Mario will file more appeals, will continue fighting, because that's what death row inmates do. They fight, they delay, they hope for a miracle or a technicality that might save their lives. But barring some unlikely legal development, Mario McNeill will eventually be executed, will face the same fate he gave Shaniya Davis, will be killed by the state he offended. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Mario strangled a 5-year-old, and someday North Carolina will stop his breathing too. Different methods, different justifications, but the same result. Whether that's justice or vengeance depends on your perspective. Bradley Lockhart sees it as justice, as appropriate punishment for an unspeakable crime. Others see it as the state committing the same violence it's condemning. The debate continues, but Mario's fate is sealed. Whether execution comes in 5 years or 25, it's coming, and he knows it. Reports from inside say Mario is a model prisoner, causes no problems, follows rules, keeps to himself. The death row guards describe him as quiet, polite even, like the monster who killed Shaniah doesn't exist anymore. But he exists, still breathes, still gets meals and medical care and legal representation. Privileges Shaniah never got, protections she wasn't afforded, a life she was denied. Antoinette Davis is at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. Maximum security, life without parole. She's been there since 2013. Will die there. Prison hasn't been easy for Antoinette. Inmates hate child killers, hate mothers who hurt their own children even more. She's been attacked multiple times, spent months in protective custody, eventually transferred to a high-security unit where she's isolated from general population. She's alive, safe from other inmates, but alone, completely alone, cut off from the children she didn't sell. The children who were removed from her care and adopted by others, who want nothing to do with her. Antoinette occasionally gives interviews, claims she's been rehabilitated, claims she understands what she did wrong, claims she's sorry, claims she thinks about Shaniah every day. Nobody believes her. Her words ring hollow, practiced, like she's saying what she thinks people want to hear rather than expressing genuine remorse. Because genuine remorse would be unbearable, would require acknowledging that she sold her daughter, traded her for $200, enabled her rape and murder. No human being could live with that level of guilt. So Antoinette maintains her delusion, maintains her belief that she made mistakes, but isn't really a monster, that she deserves sympathy, understanding, maybe even forgiveness. She'll never get it. Not from the public. Not from Bradley, not from Shania's memory. She'll die in prison having never truly accepted what she did. Bradley Lockhart has rebuilt his life, as much as anyone can after losing a child that way. He remarried, had another child, a daughter, named her Shaniya Nicole Lockhart, after the daughter he lost. It's both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful that he honored Shania's memory, heartbreaking that he needed to, that his first daughter is gone, that the new Shaniah exists in the shadow of tragedy. Bradley became an advocate, speaks at schools, at community centers, at legislative hearings, about child protection, about warning signs of abuse, about not turning away when something seems wrong. He uses Shania's story, shows her pictures, tells what happened, makes it real for people, makes them understand that this wasn't just news. This was a real child, a real family, real devastation. Some people find his advocacy healing. Others think it keeps wounds open. Bradley doesn't care what others think. He knows what he's doing, knows why it matters, knows Shania's death has to mean something. He's pushed for legislative changes, helped get Shania's law passed, advocated for increased CPS funding, testified about the failures that led to his daughter's death. Progress has been slow, frustrating, bureaucratic, But Bradley persists, because giving up would mean accepting that Shaniah died for nothing. And he can't accept that, won't accept that. The comfort suites where Shaniah was assaulted has been renovated. Room 156 was completely redone. New carpets, new furniture, new everything, trying to erase what happened there. But the staff remember. The manager who was working that day still has nightmares. The cleaning crew who processed the room after forensics finished still talk about it. The building can be renovated. Memories can't. The hotel stopped being profitable after Shaniah's case. People avoided it, associated it with her death. It eventually changed ownership, changed names, tried to distance itself from the tragedy. But locals remember, will always remember. That's the hotel where Shaniya Davis was raped, where she spent her final hours, where evidence of her suffering was collected. No amount of renovation changes that. The wooded area where Shania's body was found has a small memorial. Flowers, stuffed animals, notes. People maintain it, visit it, leave tributes to a child they never knew. It's become a symbol of innocence lost, of evil's existence, of the need for vigilance in protecting children. And visitors to that memorial leave changed, reminded that monsters are real, that children need protection, that evil doesn't announce itself. Shania's grave is in Cumberland County. Bradley visits regularly, brings flowers, talks to her, tells her about her little sister, about the advocacy work, about how her death is saving other children. It's not enough. Nothing is enough. Shaniah should be alive, should be 20 years old now, should be in college, thinking about her future, living a life full of potential. Instead, she's a memory, a photo, a name on a gravestone, a story that advocates use to push for change. But she's also more than that. She's a reminder that children are vulnerable, that adults have responsibility, that systems must protect those who can't protect themselves. Shania's death revealed failures at every level: parental, systemic, societal, and those failures continue. Other children are suffering. Other families are failing. Other systems are breaking. The question is whether we learn, whether Shania's death catalyzes real change, or whether it becomes just another tragedy, another story, another set of headlines before we move on to the next crisis. That depends on us, on whether we remember, on whether we care, on whether we demand better. Shaniah can't demand anything. She's gone, but her story remains. Her face remains. Her memory remains. And that memory asks a question. What will you do? Will you turn away? Will you forget? Will you let the next Shaniah suffer in silence? Or will you pay attention? Will you speak up? Will you demand systems that actually protect children? The answer determines whether Shania's death meant something, whether her suffering led to change, whether her life, however brief, made the world better. Mario McNeill and Antoinette Davis will pay for what they did. One with his life, one with her freedom. Justice will be served. But justice for Shaniah isn't just about punishing her killers. It's about preventing the next murder, the next betrayal, the next child sold by a mother who should have protected her. That's the real work, the hard work, the ongoing work that doesn't end with a trial or a sentence. And it's work we all share, because Shaniah was everyone's child, everyone's responsibility, everyone's failure, and honoring her means doing better, for her, for every child, for the future we claim to care about. November 10th. Every year on this date, Bradley Lockhart posts on social media photos of Shaniah, memories, a reminder that she existed, that she mattered, that she's not forgotten. This year marked 15 years since Shaniah was taken, 15 years since her life was stolen, 15 years of Bradley carrying grief that never fully heals. The posts get thousands of responses. People who remember, people who were moved by her story, people who use the anniversary to recommit to protecting children. Shaniah would have been 20 years old today, Bradley wrote this year. She'd be in college, or working, living her life, making her own choices, But she never got that chance. Because two monsters decided her life was worth less than their depravity. He included photos. Shaniah smiling, playing, being a normal 5-year-old. The images stand in stark contrast to the surveillance footage, to the horror of her final hours, a reminder of who she was before evil found her. I want people to remember Shaniah as she was, Bradley continued, not just as a victim, not just as a tragic story, but as a real child, person, my daughter, who deserved to grow up, who deserved better than what she got. The post went viral, shared thousands of times, people adding their own comments, their own memories if they'd followed the case, their own commitments to protecting children. But viral posts don't save children. Shares don't fund CPS. Likes don't fix broken systems. And Bradley knows this, knows that awareness without action is meaningless. That's why he doesn't just post. He acts, works with child advocacy organizations, raises money, lobbies legislators, speaks at events, turns grief into purpose, turns loss into legacy. The Shaniya Davis Foundation was established in 2011. Bradley and other family members created it. Its mission: protecting children from abuse and exploitation, supporting CPS workers, educating parents, funding programs that identify at-risk children. The foundation has helped hundreds of children, funded training for social workers, provided resources for foster families, created awareness campaigns, made a real difference. But it's not enough. It's never enough, because children are still suffering, still being abused, still being failed by systems that should protect them. The Foundation's most successful program is Know Your Neighbor. It provides free background check resources to parents, educates them about sex offender registries, empowers them to screen adults who have access to their children. Participation has been high. Thousands of parents use the service. Check babysitters, coaches, neighbors, anyone who might pose a risk. Has it prevented abuse? Probably, definitely. Multiple parents have discovered concerning backgrounds, made different childcare choices, protected their children from potential predators. That's Shania's legacy. Children saved, families protected, evil prevented. It's not justice for her death. Nothing can give her justice, but its purpose, meaning, impact. The foundation also supports CPS workers, provides grants for continuing education, funds wellness programs, recognizes outstanding caseworkers. Because CPS workers are overworked, underpaid, and blamed when tragedies occur. They need support, need resources, need society to recognize the impossible job they're doing. And the foundation tries to provide that. One caseworker who received a foundation grant wrote to Bradley, thanked him for understanding, for not blaming all social workers for what happened to Shaniah, for recognizing that most are trying their best in a broken system. Your daughter's death wasn't my fault, she wrote, but it haunts me anyway, because I'm a social worker, and every child death feels like a failure, like something I should have prevented. Your foundation's support means more than you know. It reminds us that we're not alone, that we're not villains, that we're trying to help. Bradley responded, told her he understood, that he blamed the system, not the workers, that he knew most social workers cared deeply, that they were doing impossible work with inadequate resources. Shaniah needed people like you, he wrote back. She needed a system that supported you in protecting her. That system failed us both. Failed you by giving you an impossible job. Failed Shaniah by not providing adequate protection. I don't blame you. I blame a society that doesn't prioritize children. These exchanges happen regularly. Social workers, teachers, advocates, people who work in child protection thanking Bradley for understanding the complexity, for not villainizing them, for directing anger at systems rather than individuals. It's a nuanced position, requires acknowledging that individuals made mistakes while understanding those mistakes occurred within a failing system, requires balancing accountability with compassion. Bradley manages it. because his goal isn't revenge. It's prevention. And prevention requires working with the people on the front lines, supporting them, strengthening them, enabling them to do the work better. Shania's story is taught in social work programs now, used as a case study, examining what went wrong, what red flags existed, what interventions might have helped. Students analyze Antoinette's history, the CPS reports, the court decisions, the missed opportunities. They're asked, what would you have done differently? There are no easy answers. The students struggle, realize how complex these situations are, how many factors are involved, how hard it is to make life or death decisions with incomplete information. But they also learn to look for specific warning signs, learn to push harder when instincts say something's wrong, learn that sometimes following procedure isn't enough. Sometimes you have to take risks, make noise, refuse to let a case be closed when children are in danger. Will these lessons save children? Hopefully, probably, some. Not all, never all, but some is better than none. Some children saved because social workers learned from Shania's death is meaningful. Bradley speaks to these classes sometimes, tells Shania's story, answers questions, helps future social workers understand the stakes, understand that they're not just managing case files, they're protecting lives. You'll make mistakes, he tells them. You'll have too many cases, too little time, too few resources. You'll do your best and still lose children, and you'll have to live with that. But don't let it make you cynical. Don't let it make you stop caring. Because the child you save tomorrow is worth all the pain from the one you couldn't save yesterday. It's hard advice, heartbreaking advice, but honest advice, and the students appreciate it. Appreciate Bradley's willingness to engage, to not blame them for a system they're inheriting, to encourage rather than condemn. Media still covers Shania's case periodically. Anniversary stories, updates on appeals, documentaries examining what happened. Each telling keeps her memory alive, keeps her story in public consciousness. Some criticize this, say it exploits tragedy, say it sensationalizes suffering, say it reduces Shaniah to a victim rather than remembering her as a person. Bradley disagrees. I want her story told. I want people to know what happened, because knowing prevents forgetting, and forgetting allows repetition. As long as people remember Shaniah, they'll pay attention, they'll protect their children, they'll demand better systems. He's probably right. Awareness matters, attention matters, stories matter, and Shania's story, however tragic, serves a purpose, educates, warns, motivates, but it's also exhausting. For Bradley, for family, for everyone connected to Shaniah, because every retelling reopens wounds. Every documentary requires reliving trauma. Every interview means discussing the worst moments of their lives. Bradley does it anyway, because Shaniah deserves to be remembered, deserves to have her death mean something, deserves to save other children even though she couldn't save herself. On what would have been Shania's 20th birthday, Bradley released balloons at her grave. 20 balloons. One for each year she should have lived. Each balloon carried a message. Dreams people had for Shaniah. Things she might have become. Lives she might have touched. It was beautiful. Heartbreaking. A celebration of potential never realized. Of life cut short. Of all the moments Shaniah would never experience. Bradley stood watching the balloons rise, disappear into the sky, carrying hopes and dreams that would never be fulfilled. And he cried, not just for Shaniah, but for every child whose life is stolen, every parent who loses their baby, every future erased by evil. But he also felt determination, because grieving isn't enough, crying isn't enough, remembering isn't enough. Action is what matters. Change is what matters. Preventing the next tragedy is what matters. And Bradley Lockhart is committed to that prevention. For Shaniah, for all children, for a future where no parent has to stand at their child's grave wondering what might have been. Shaniya Davis was 5 years old when she died. She liked dolls, liked singing, liked being a kid. She deserved to grow up, deserved to live, deserved better than what she got. We can't give her back her life, can't undo what was done, can't erase the horror of her final hours. But we can remember her, can tell her story, can demand better protection for children, can work to prevent the next Shaniah. That's not justice. Justice would be Shaniah alive. Justice would be her celebrating her 20th birthday with friends. Justice would be her having a future. But since we can't have justice, we settle for purpose, for meaning, for change, for saving the children we can save because we couldn't save Shaniah. And maybe that's enough. Maybe Shaniah's legacy is every child protected because people remembered her story. Every reform passed because legislators couldn't forget her face. Every system improved because society demanded better. Maybe that's how we honor her. Not with tears, not with memorials, but with action, with change, with relentless commitment to protecting children. Shaniya Davis, born January 22, 2004, died November 10, 2009. 5 years old, forever 5 years old. Remember her, say her name, tell her story, and then do something, anything, to make sure no other child suffers the way she suffered. That's what she deserves. That's what all children deserve. That's what we owe to Shaniah and to every child we failed to protect. Remember and act. If you made it through the story, thank you. Thank you for bearing witness to Shaniah's suffering, for honoring her memory, for caring enough to listen. Now take that caring and turn it into action. Check on the children in your life. Report suspicions of abuse. Support organizations that protect children. Be the person who makes a difference. Be the person Shaniah needed. We failed her. Don't fail the next child. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware,